Hey guys. Welcome to another episode of Occulted. And since we are in the beginning of our disclosure summer, our UFO summer, I thought it would be fun to do an episode on aliens and disclosure. I guess again, I've been sort of following this on my series for a long time, but we have had a bunch of drops, I guess you could say, from like the government is, releasing all of their, files or whatever. And there's this big push to disclose aliens and what aliens are and our relationship with aliens and advanced technology, which means advanced propulsion, which means reverse engineering and probably things like free energy and this whole technological revolution that's coming forward, but also this sort of spiritual reframing of the world, a sort of spiritual revolution as well. So, how I see this is not just about the technology, it's not just about UFOs being photographed on gun cameras, doing these incredible maneuvers. And by the way, when you look at some of this footage, um, why does it have to be extraterrestrial? So there's nothing that I've seen thus far that is suggesting that any of that has to be from another planet. Why is the conversation just always pushed aside that we have this technology ourselves? Why is there always this weird elephant in the room where the military industrial complex is able to develop technologies 100 years in advance to where we are, privately, quietly, in their own private companies and their own programs. They're doing that, not sharing it with us, profiting from it, creating a control grid structure from that technology. Yet they come out and then say, oh, well, it's aliens that did that. It's aliens that created this. We didn't. We just reverse engineered it. And that, in my opinion, is because I don't think they want to be honest and admit that they have been developing this technology for a very long time. And if they just say they got it from a reverse engineered craft, then they don't have to talk about the crimes that they've committed in order to protect the fact that they're trying to become so technologically advanced in these private societies, these elites, that they're trying to then use that incredible technological advancement to then consolidate all power and control under a technate, which is kind of a technologically advanced culture that they're at the top of. Because that's what we can see happening is this collapse of the world slowly and not so slowly underneath this technate, but they have to kind of describe where they got this technology from. Okay, and if you don't know, Dark Journalist has been doing this incredible series on the missing scientists. I think he's like 13 or 14 episodes in or something at this point. And so what's going on there? Right before disclosure. So we have this weird situation going on where all these different topics are conflated together. We have this incredibly important topic about very advanced technology, technology that kind of messes with the fabric of reality. And we also have this religious aspect to it. And so that's what we see with disclosure. On one hand, it is the conversation of advanced technology. And on the other hand, there is this spiritualism. You know, I just saw, I think it was Ross Coulthart talking about how he likes to lay on his back and communicate with the UFOs. And, you know, Stephen Greer very famously has meditation circles that meet to communicate with the UFOs and the alien beings. And so there's all of this very strange stuff that is all conflated into disclosure, which is religious themes. And how are we supposed to have an honest disclosure, an honest, objective disclosure, if the people that are disclosing, like, you know, Stephen Greer or these other people that have this clear religion around aliens, they have spiritual feelings around aliens. They think aliens created humanity. They think aliens are here to gift this technology that's billions of years ahead of us. They think that aliens fly around in a galactic federation like Hamish Shad from the Israeli Space Force that thinks that aliens fly around in a galactic federation looking after humanity, basically taking the place of what the angels do. So you see this weird spiritual ontology, this weird redefining, this weird spirituality coming forward with disclosure. And the people that are like, oh my God, yes, this technology is real. These beings are real. They also just happen to worship the technology. They think God is in the technology. They think that the aliens are gods, that they created them, that they're an AI signal or whatever it is. There's so many versions of this. So there is a version of disclosure that is sober and real that can be completely outside of all of this bizarre religious worship of technology. Okay, worshiping of technology, thinking that if we just have the right technology, we'll all be free. All we need is free energy and we'll all be free. Well, first of all, no energy is free. Nothing is free in this world. Everything costs something. So the moment that someone tells you that you can just tap into the energy of the cosmos without any regard for what's going on in the spiritual world, that is a lie. And that is the same lie that plagued Atlantis. Okay, so we have to get real about this worshiping of technology, thinking that technology is going to solve everything when it certainly will only make things worse if it's not stewarded properly. And this worshiping of aliens, this worshiping of these beings that a lot of And people laugh and they say, like, well, I don't think that aliens created humanity. It's like, yeah, well, you don't think that, but a lot of very, very powerful people do. A lot of Darwinists do. A lot of people who believe in Darwinian evolution think that aliens are the missing link and that the reason why Darwin couldn't get it right is that he was correct that human beings came from apes, but that he was not correct in that they evolved slowly, but that there was actually interference with humanity by these godlike aliens, and that human beings are half ape and half um, alien, which is a complete literalist, materialist, distorted interpretation of the idea of like the animal nature and what happened in the Lemurian period when the apes regressed from humans. So we do have, listen, we have the ability to properly steward this technology, to properly steward this information. We have it. The people are here, okay? You're here watching. There's no need for this stuff to spin out of control as much as it does with these individuals who have worshipful feelings. Avi Loeb. Avi Loeb was coming out here 6, 7 months ago saying that he's this big, you know, scientist from Harvard and part of the Israeli intelligence side. And he's the guy that's going to discover this alien life on this asteroid while he's worshiping aliens and saying that humanity has to become like an extraterrestrial society and see different worlds, have a cosmic exodus, thinking that aliens are interacting with humanity, having to find this alien technology. So these people have religious and spiritual ideas about aliens and creation and technology, and they're also stewarding disclosure. This is a major, major conflict of interest because technology is just a tool. It's not a spiritual thing. It's not going to save you. It's not going to save me. It's just a tool. AI is just a tool. These are tools for humanity. They're not going to bring God through. You're not going to save your soul by uploading yourself into the cloud either. You're not going to have clairvoyant gifts by getting Neuralink. That's not clairvoyance. That's not claircognizance. That's just hooking the internet up to your brain. That's materialism. So the problem with this wave of technologists and disclosurites and all these people that want this is they worship the thing that they're bringing through. And in their mind, they already have a place for this because they have a religion around it. And that's what we need to understand is that this is not just about like, I saw a metal sphere that did all these maneuvers that, I can't explain. Okay, well, yeah, they're way far ahead of us. There's no need to even think that's extraterrestrial for 1 second. What indicates that? The only precedent that indicates that is A, you don't understand humanity's ancient past, which we have this technology in Atlantis. Like, where do you think those megaliths come from? We can't even build them today with what we have. You think that ingenuity wasn't applied to propulsion? You think we just kept it to building a pyramid and we didn't apply that exact same engineering prowess to technology? Of course we did. So there's all of this cognitive dissonance that's going on all the time with this topic. And the good thing about disclosure and the UFO summer of disclosure is that now maybe we can finally talk about it and it won't be kind of like just this really weird, corrupt thing in spirituality and conspiracy. This kind of like putrid CIA involvement in every possible thing, and even beyond the CIA, these weird secret societies that worship technology and worship aliens, trying to bring their religion upon us, because that's how they finally consolidate control. So today we're going to go even deeper into disclosure and even deeper into this topic, which is beginning to look at things in a little bit of a different way, which is that the idea of aliens is very similar to the concept of the guardian at the threshold or the dweller at the threshold. So we're going to evaluate today this concept. What is the guardian at the threshold historically, and how can we sort of parse this out to kind of see how, in a way, this alien phenomenon, both spiritual ideas of it and more physical, kind of is like humanity's collective guardian at the threshold moment. A moment where we get to see our own shadow, our own sort of reverse manifestation, our own dystopian path is reflected to us. Okay. So I didn't even bother grabbing any of the videos or the images from the last two dumps, because it is the same kind of videos and images that have been tossed around in the disclosure movement for the last 10 years. It doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove that, an alien did that. It doesn't, it's just, it's just this kind of lead up. And I have no doubt that they are building, at least in their mind, they think that they're building up to this great crescendo where they reveal some tissue samples or something from some chimera they made at some point, or they have some kind of advanced technology, some advanced propulsion they want to say is alien to hide their own crimes. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. We're definitely not at a point in these like tranches that are released where I have found anything worth talking about. Most of the stuff most of the stuff that I see online, from the UFO drop. I mean, I was looking at that stuff when I was practically a teenager on the weird conspiracy forums, like hybridization. They're abducting people and they're hybridizing. Yeah, I mean, X-Files ran with that for a decade. That's like normal. They're just trying to, I guess, bring legitimacy to already existing UFO narratives. A lot of this stuff I was reading on weird spiritual forums when I was like a young person. So we're not at any point, at least for me, with everything I cover on my channel, we're not at a point where I care to really evaluate any of that, because I may as well just go read a forum post from like Project Avalon or Project Camelot, or one of these conspiracy forums that was talking about this way, way, way before, the government is. They're kind of slow on this. And by the way, I do think that what makes the most sense for me is that they do need the technology piece of the UFO file to consolidate power. They have to create a technological revolution, right? That's why they're bringing out all the AI in the last 10 years. That's why they're, wanting to build the Golden Dome, which is just basically a massive surveillance grid. That's why people dislike Palantir for its interlacing with the military and the government and every other tech bro too. So it's just this weird consolidation of our beautiful Earth into a technate, which is the worst kind of slavery that you can imagine. And they need the UFO file and the UFO information to bring that technology out, because they have to have a reason why they have this incredibly advanced stuff, and they want to say it's aliens. And the final cincher into controlling a population is you have to get them spiritually. Okay, you just can't have a technate and have people believing in God, right? You can't control people and have them praying and calling in God. Like, you got to get rid of that. So there's no technate unless they destroy religion. One way to destroy religion is to make it a complete materialist mess and say aliens created humanity. That every single holy book, from the Bhagavad Gita to the Sumerians to the Bible to Hebrew writings, is actually talking about aliens. And you just didn't read these scriptures right. You need to read it literally. These aren't metaphors. These aren't angels. These aren't elementals. These aren't this different real spiritual phenomenon that we understand through the hierarchies that's existed longer than this concept ever has. These are aliens. And so the alien thing we have to understand as an affront to religion, and particularly to spiritual initiation, particularly to resurrection and particularly to Christ, which every spiritual system, if it's balanced, has a conception of the Christ. You may not call it that, but there is a conception of God, right? So, let's get into the Guardian at the threshold, because I think that because they're trying to make this such a spiritual event, and I think that that's also why you see, Matt Gaetz comes forward and is like, I don't know, a friend of a friend. Like they know it's super weird. They know that talking about genetic manipulation to the public by aliens is comical. In part because, these different organizations have spent so much time humiliating people that would even talk about like a weird spiritual experience or an abduction experience or a crop circle. You know, they would humiliate you and make you feel like an absolute freak if you ever talked about it. But now they're trying to talk about it, and now they've locked people into, you're a conspiracy theorist. Don't question the JFK assassination. Don't question, anything that we say. You're a conspiracy theorist. Don't talk about like, alien abductions. You're a conspiracy theorist. But now they're having a hard time actually getting this narrative going because everyone just says that's a conspiracy. So now they're kind of, I think, eating their hats a little bit on this. But ultimately, there is this weird thing where they're like talking about the hybridization project. Oh, humans are being hybridized by aliens. This is huge in the new age. Anyone who like channels the GFL, channels aliens, talks about the fact that humans were actually created in a petri dish by a bunch of alien beings flying around in these mad scientist laboratories, basically creating a eugenics project in the cosmos, like breeding all of the races, breeding, some human beings are closer to the alien gods. That's the royal bloodline. And it's like that has nothing to do with what made someone divine. I can tell you that right now. It has nothing to do with aliens. It has nothing to do with people being genetically manipulated into different races or different types. This is just crazy, mad scientist trash. It has nothing to do with spirituality. It has nothing to do with our ancient past, and it will not stand. Because we have to have a healthy, meaningful, and true version of our past and our creation to actually evolve into the future. Because all of these patterns are recapitulated. We operate in cycles. So if you have some messed up, weird, mad scientist, materialist, eugenics, petri dish version of your own past and your creation, that's going to be your future, which is exactly what they're wanting to do. Right? If you are created as a genetic experiment, as a eugenics project, then that's how you evolve. That's how you solve every disease. That's the future that we go into. Do you see this? That if they can make our beginnings aliens and petri dishes and eugenics and genetic manipulation, our future will be that we have to go off world and seed worlds and be eugenicists, and we have to live in a Gattaca society. We have to have genetic manipulation, vaccines to control and deal with disease because we are the result of genetic manipulation. We are our whole earth, our whole being is a hybridized entity. So hybridization is the future. That's how we have to evolve. It's the answer to disease. It's the answer to everything. Everything is external manipulation rather than internal transformation. Do you see how this is sick? Not even sick, not even judging it that way, but just untrue. Like it's fake. It never happened. Right. And if we look back, anyway, I'm not going to go too much more into it because I think I'm sort of a broken record on this to my audience. I've done several series on this, but it's relevant because of how aliens are portrayed, which are basically these, spindly, androgynous, beings that are often described as cyborgs, or they're described as not being able to reproduce anymore. Like aliens are quite literally, like when you think of alien, I'm talking the most common vision of alien, which is like the alien gray or Whitley Strieber's Communion or the gray alien. That is basically humanity's guardian at the threshold. That is basically a vision of humanity if we were to take the most dystopian, dark path imaginable, which is to clone and genetically manipulate ourselves into no longer being able to reproduce, and we have complete genetic collapse. That's what it looks like. And then the cyborg parts too, trying to better yourself, not through initiation, right? Not through transformation internally, but external transformations through transhumanism. That's literally what the Greys are. If you read any of the lore, any of the experiences, even even Daryl Anka, who channels a Grey, is probably the most popular channeler for what are the Grey aliens, which he calls the Sasani. He has a similar version. He won't admit that, he won't say like this is something from the Earth. He says, oh, it's from another planet, like Zeta Reticuli or somewhere, like I don't know, wherever. And that they went down this dark path of transhumanism and genetic manipulation, but now they're here to help us by abducting us and taking our genetics, breeding themselves back into the human line. But they're aliens. So, and that's the story from many different people who channel these alien greys. It's literally different variations of the same story, which is that the alien greys represent humanity down a total dystopian timeline. And so that is basically saying those are the collective dwellers at the threshold, representing everything dark that we could become, and we're confronting them and we're facing them now, and maybe in a sense, or literally, we're actually creating them. But it is us, it is what we would become if we do not confront this period of evil and shadow correctly. Okay, so let's get into the guardian at the threshold. But at first, I want to tell you guys that I am going to be teaching a 6-week class starting in June, and it is called Your Guardian Angel and Spirit Guides. Okay, so this is a 6-week class. It can be for a beginner if you don't know anything about this, or you can also take it if you are more advanced and you are, aware of these different topics. But particularly when it comes to the topic of the guardian at the threshold and the idea of demonic entities and what is a demonic entity, what is an angel. Week 2, we cover that in depth. I think it might even take me like 4 hours to just lecture through all my content that I have written for that. So if you are interested and you want to support my work here, do consider signing up. I will be teaching every Saturday from June 6th for 6 weeks, and we'll end in one massive live Q&A, I think around July 11th. And I'd love to have you there with me. It's always a great crew. It's always a great chat. It's just really fun. So do consider checking that out. I get more into the curriculum on that in my last video called My Craziest Experience with My Guardian Angel. So if you want to know the curriculum, that's where it is. And so I'd love to have you there, and let's get into the guardian at the threshold. So what is the guardian at the threshold? What is it? What is the dweller at the threshold? You'll hear both of those terms. Well, in esotericism, there are different kinds of archetypal spiritual experiences that you have. Some are positive. Some are sort of like archetypal experiences that you can have with God. And everyone moves through these kind of encounters, but they move through them within their own personal experiences. So the encounter is archetypal, but the experience of it is personal, which is very typical for esoterica. So in esotericism, there is this concept that at a certain point in your development, usually when you just start to become spiritually awakened, you will encounter the guardian at the threshold. And this is typically a pretty scary experience. People will, even if you just go look at different message boards or read what people have said about it, um, it's sort of a terrifying experience because at some point you get to this level where you have to confront your shadow. You have to kind of confront what is not healed within you. And in the astral, that is an archetypal image basically of your shadow self. So at a certain point in development, you sort of come across this horrific experience very often of all of the parts of you that are unhealed. But it's not like the way that I'm talking about it, you viscerally experience it. So it's not just about like, what did it look like what's its name or something. It's like you actually experience your shadow. And so it's not so much about the visual, it's about you experience the kind of terror of everything within you that you have not yet brought to God and dealt with. So you could say that it's sort of like the guardian at the threshold is something that people like in nightmares, people will experience it, sometimes in meditations, and they represent all of you. It represents all of your accumulated karma, your lower nature that's not transformed, your fears, sort of like the unresolved aspects that block you from going higher. So the whole thing about spiritual initiation is that in order to actually get into the higher levels of the spiritual world, you actually have to have certain qualities developed. So this whole modern idea about the spiritual planes just being like a layer cake of energy, it's not true. They're actually different qualities or gates. And the only way you can actually get into the higher, more perfected planes is if you are that. So you actually have to have certain qualities developed within your soul to pass into the higher worlds. And if you don't have those qualities developed, if you're not living in a certain way, right? If you're not at a certain point of development, you cannot go any further. That you shall not pass, literally. And the entity standing there is the dweller at the threshold. So in a way, also you could see the dweller at the threshold as being as scary as it is. You could see the dweller being kind of like a protection as well, because you would just explode. You'd be very harmed if you were to experience these higher levels of the heavens without the right purification and development of your body. So the guardian at the threshold is also a protector in a weird way because it's showing you that you're not ready. And I've had these experiences many different times. And the first few times I thought I was, the first few times I genuinely thought I was like under some kind of psychic attack or something. And I was like, what is going on? Um, and then eventually I realized that after I had these encounters with the guardian, I would, if I paid attention to my body and I paid attention to my mind, that I had actually gotten along with the terror, I'd actually gotten like an impression of where I was being selfish or where I was being like the evil in myself. So at first, the situation was terrifying, like I would actually scream. And then I realized that the more that I came into attunement and alignment, I stopped that. And after the experiences, I was actually able to ascertain kind of like this nugget about how I was living my life that really was not integrated with God. And I probably wouldn't have even considered it unless I had experienced that intense fear. So, like, you can't view the idea of the dweller as being like this pure evil thing. You have to understand that the dweller is there to prevent you from going into these higher planes and then exploding spiritually because you don't have the qualities necessary to go any further. Um, and this is very typical when you think about how people describe demonic entities and in general the lower astral world or the demonic world, which is that, they typically will appear to you not as they are, but they'll appear to you in a way that represents a message for you. This is how, when you get deep into demonology, that's how it's taught, is that the demonic entity, you're not going to see that entity as it really is in its own creation, in its own nature, because you're not in its world, you're not from its world. So you're going to see it in relationship to our world and in relationship to yourself. So um, this is why it can be sort of challenging to even, there's a level when you discuss spiritual beings, you have to come at it from a level of understanding subjectivity and objectivity and having a good sense of that, because you can make a lot of mistakes when that's not understood. So there are objective beings that can be identified with objective qualities and laws and things, but sometimes your experience of them can be subjective and sort of like uh, there may be some commonalities, but there's a lot of subjectivity in spiritual experience because of um, the nature of the material world and how spiritual beings appear in it. So, and really a large part of spiritual life is dealing with this. A large part of true spiritual development is dealing with your dark side. And the more you deal with your dark side, having the skills to acknowledge the the kind of entities that exist out there that you may run into. Okay, so the guardian at the threshold is a spiritual being that appears as a warning to the individual. Their presence often induces fear as they radiate the essence of the person's shadow to them. While terrifying, the guardian is protecting the person from entering into a realm that their consciousness cannot sustain. The experience and image of the guardian also reveals something of the individual's nature or the individual's culture. So you'll find the guardian exists in nearly every culture, but they'll describe it different. But you'll see the main archetype there as well. So now that we understand the basic general idea of what the guardian at the threshold is, let's get into the history of it. Let's get into it in ancient history, and then we'll get into it in kind of more modern esoterica. Okay, so the first time you see the guardian at the threshold, it's not really discussed as we just did. How we discussed it is very much as an individual experience that you're having when you're dreaming or when you have a meditation practice or something like that. The first time that we really see the discussion about the dwellers or the guardians at the threshold, we really see that through the death traditions. So I have an entire lecture called The Mystery of Death where I discuss this in detail. But just for today, it doesn't really matter the civilization, whether it be Egypt, Tibet, Asia, or Greece. There was a very specific view of the death process, which was that when you passed away, now because we're such a materialistic culture, there is this incredible fear of death. And death is medicalized and it becomes something that people don't even think that you have a soul that continues on after death. And so death today in our materialist culture is completely different than how people used to view death, even 4,000 years ago. Totally different. And in particular, how they describe it actually in ancient India was that when you pass away, you actually die in this body, but you awaken in heaven. You awaken in this higher world. And they would call these higher worlds lokas, Lokas, which also means planets, because in esoterica, when people talk about the planets, they're not talking about like the physical planet of like Neptune. They're talking about the planet as a realm. And it doesn't matter what tradition you're in, whether it's from the east or whether it's from the west or whatever. When people are talking about planets, they're not talking about like an entity living on Venus. They're talking about the realm of the heavens, which is marked by the planets. So every planet is marking a realm. And the planet is like a shell of materialization that marks that realm symbolically in our sky, which is why we view the heavens as up. And so in the east, there's all these different lokas, and you wake up from your life and then you pass through all of these different lokas, all of these different planetary spheres, or all of these different planetary sojourns, as Edgar Cayce would say, or bardos, as the Tibetans would say, or in the West, we would just say cosmic realms, or the first heaven, second heaven, third heaven in Christianity. They're all describing an objective structure of the cosmos, which people start to call like the spiritual planes or the spiritual world or dimensions. They're not really dimensions. They're really realms. They're really planetary realms. Sometimes when people try to describe things too objectively without real knowledge of the soul, you get this weird removed materialistic structure that doesn't actually work for initiation. So you're moving through, when you pass away, you're moving through these different realms, basically. And every time you meet one of the realms, you're confronted by a guardian. Now, in the Egyptian culture, they're called the gates. And this is also the initiation process, actually. The death process is also the initiation process of the human being, because all the qualities of the different realms are the qualities the soul needs to develop to become completely immortal and cease incarnation in the material world. All right. So every time we reach a different loka, a different realm, a different plane, a different planetary level, we sort of confront a dweller at that plane, a guardian at the gate. And when we meet that guardian, we have to reflect that we have developed within our soul the capacity and the quality and really the nobility to pass through that gate consciously. So some people can pass through these gates, like you're talking about a saint or a bodhisattva or like a spiritual master. They can pass through these gates because they've reached certain levels of immortality, of eternal life. But if you haven't, and you haven't developed at all, then you basically go through these sort of different trials, and these trials dwindle down your consciousness, make you more asleep. And, in the Egyptian and Tibetan books of the dead, they talk about being dismembered, lakes of fire. Well, that's the experience of the shadow in the soul world. And that's the breaking down and not being able to pass into things consciously if you can't sustain this unzipping. So the first time we see, and you also see these different trials, like the weighing of the heart on the scale and these different battles and these different things, which is all happening within the soul. And that's part of the death and rebirth process. And at every single gate, there is a dweller, which also represents the question within that says, have you developed the qualities? Are you noble enough to enter through this gate? Right? And so that's where we first see the dweller at the threshold. We first see it in actually the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Egyptian books of the dead. This is carried over into Greece. That is the ancient world. The ancient world had a different way of existing. They acknowledged the eternality of the soul, and they didn't have this extremely materialistic, literalistic view of the planets or of the world. They just didn't. So the concept of the guardian at the threshold is ancient, and we can trace it back through the earliest cultures in their death teachings. From Egypt to Asia to Greece, most early traditions trained their adherents in what the soul would encounter upon death. This included confronting different guardians that stood at the threshold of the gates, of the various gates. And these are planetary. You can view them also as, in part, planetary gates as well, or the lokas. In order to pass through the gate consciously, the soul would have to have certain qualities developed. This allowed them to pass the test of the guardian. So the guardian is testing you. The guardian is saying, are you noble enough to pass through here? Are you glorified? How have you spent your life? Have you spent your life in service to people, to the world? Have you spent your life drawing yourself closer to God, transforming your spiritual bodies? Over the last few years, I've spoken extensively about how we have to transform our astral body to glorify the etheric body and even to glorify eventually the physical body. That's what allows you to pass through the gates of heaven in one piece. That's what allows you to pass the guardian. You have to have your subtle bodies glorified or developed. And you do that through not knowledge, not like studying. You don't do it through technology. You do it through your connection with Christ, with God within you. That's how you do it. And it's a mystery how exactly it's done, but when you begin to do it, you'll know exactly what you're doing, right? Or not exactly, but you'll have a sense of it. You'll understand because you'll feel it. So that's the idea of the guardian. It's a and I'm sure you guys have seen like Twin Peaks and the guardian at the threshold in different Gnostic traditions and these different Gnostic ideologies talks about the guardian as well. So this is actually a pretty central topic in esotericism and just in spirituality. I mean, everyone's probably experienced their guardian. A lot of people will actually have this period of incredible enlightenment, like they're getting these sort of like downloads and they feel closer to God and they almost feel like they're speeding up. That sometimes when they'll have this experience, it sometimes can almost feel like it's slapping them back down because they're receiving all the spiritual enlightenment or the spiritual energy, but it's maybe not integrated properly. And then so you experience the guardian, right? So the first time I was able to find the actual phrase or term, the guardian, I think it's pretty much in Rosicrucianism. And I think the author that says it first that I can find, if there's anyone that talks about it before this, let me know in the comments, because this is the earliest I could find the exact phrase, dweller at the threshold or guardian at the threshold. And that was in Edward Bulwer Lytton's Zanoni in 1842. Before that, it's just the concept is just in the books of the dead and in the death cultures of our ancestors, basically. And in Zanoni, Zanoni is actually considered sort of an initiation text for a lot of different, you know, people. And in Zanoni, you have this student who is studying under this master, typical apprenticeship. And the master gets to a point with the student where he's learning a lot, he's picking things up, he's doing his thing, it's good. And then the master says, I'm gonna go on a little vacation, but do not open the cabinet. Do not go in this room. And then he like leaves the key on the counter kind of thing, like testing his student. And of course, while the master's gone, the student, his curiosity gets the better of him. And this is the description in Zanoni on the experience with the guardian at the threshold. The cloud retreated from it as it advanced. The bright lamps grew and flickered relentlessly as at the breath of its presence. Its form was veiled as at the face, but the outline was that of a female. Yet it moved not as moves even the ghosts that simulate the living. It seemed rather to crawl as some vast misshapen reptile. And pausing at length, it cowered beside the table which held the mystic volume, and again fixed its eyes through the filmy veil on the rash invoker. All fancies, the most grotesque, of the monk or painter in the early North would have failed to give the visage of imp or fiend that aspect of deadly malignity which spoke to the shuddering nature in those eyes alone. All else so dark, shrouded, veiled, and larva-like. But that burning glare, so intense, so livid, yet so living, had in it something that was almost human, in its passion of hate and mockery, something that served to show that the shadowy horror was not all a spirit, but partook of matter enough, at least to make it more deadly and fearful an enemy to material forms. As, clinging with the grasp of agony to the wall, his hair erect, his eyeballs glaring, he still gazed back upon that appalling gaze. The image spoke to him. His soul, rather than his ear, comprehended the words it said. Thou hast entered the immeasurable region. I am the dweller of the threshold. What wouldst thou want with me? Dost thou fear me? Am I not thy beloved? Is it not for me that thou hast rendered up the delights of thy race? Wouldn't thou be wise? Mine is the wisdom of countless ages. Kiss me, my mortal lover. And the horror crawled near and nearer to him. It crept to his side. Its breath breathed upon its cheek. With a sharp cry, he fell to the earth insensible and knew no more till far in the noon of the next day, he opened his eyes and found himself in his bed, the glorious sun streaming through the lattice, and the bandit, Paolo by his side, engaged in polishing his carbine and whistling a Calabrian love air. So the student essentially does what the master says, don't do, and he experiences this sort of reptilian, slithering, veiled woman who tries to seduce him and says, I am the guardian. And so this is how the guardian at the threshold was described for this one individual. And I think the reptilian quality is really interesting here because You'll hear a lot of people that have a similar experience where they'll see like a lizard person. They'll see like scales or the slits in the eye, and they'll say, well, this is like an alien. And this is like a magical alien that can, you know, appear and disappear and over and like attach to people and overshadow. But I think actually what's going on and the idea of people seeing lizard shapes and lizard forms overlaid is ancient. That's how Lucifer is portrayed in the garden. So the idea of a serpentine entity is describing a luciferic rupa, a luciferic dweller, a luciferic entity. Lucifer is the serpent because clairvoyantly, classically, Lucifer has appeared as a serpentine man, a serpentine individual. So it's very interesting to me that we have this one kind of dweller, which is literally a reptilian. And people are saying that this is an alien. You know, there's one guy that came forward in this kind of like disclosure flap, and he's like, you know, there's 4 different kinds of aliens, and one of them is a reptilian. And it's like, okay, well, are we just calling the Luciferian spirit that is represented to us, which has always been a lizard? Are we just now calling that an alien because we've lost our footing here and we're interpreting it in a complete materialist approach? Because my problem with a lot of this alien stuff, and I used to believe a lot of it too, obviously, but my problem with it is that so much of it just isn't original. Like nobody goes out and says, yeah, I have my telescope in the backyard, you know, like come take a look. I've discovered a colony on Jupiter's moon. Let's go take a look at it. Okay, well, that's fine if I can objectively observe this alien. What ends up happening with all of this alien stuff is they take classical phenomenon that's thousands of years old, and then they call it an alien and then start associating it with like technology. Like the reptilian is now an alien using technology. And it's just this weird segue into transhumanism and where classical spiritual phenomenon is recategorized as being an extraterrestrial entity, and the material aspect and the spiritual aspect is totally conflated. People don't even know how to classify these aliens. People are calling them spiritual beings, but then they somehow exist outside the classical spiritual hierarchies. Okay, so this is something that's completely extra. It's a delusion because it's not that you have to use the term deva. Like you don't have to use an Eastern esoteric term to describe a spiritual being. You don't have to use the term angel to describe a spiritual being. You can create whatever language that you want. But where it becomes a red flag is stuff like this, when you already have hefty examples of people experiencing these different kinds of spiritual entities, many of them demonic, many of them Luciferian in nature or whatever, and knowing that. And then you're not just redefining this Luciferian lizard appearance, you're creating a completely different cosmology from the fact that you didn't define it properly. That's the problem. The problem isn't like, oh, you're using the wrong language, language police. The problem is the moment that you don't acknowledge that these are already teachings that exist and understand them, and you just start creating your own thing around a bad definition that doesn't represent the evolution of the soul in any way, then you're pedaling your bike in your own delusions and telling other people about it. Listen, there's no point in discussing spiritual beings or the spiritual world unless it leads to your initiation. We don't talk about spiritual life for fun. We don't talk about it out of just scientific interest. We go into the spiritual world understanding that when we interact with spiritual life, it is for our spiritual advancement. When you don't do that, you are in danger. This isn't me just trying to be some controlling, weird person on the internet. I'm telling you that when you enter into the spiritual world, you must do it from a certain place to protect yourself. The place in which we enter into spiritual conversation is with the conscious knowledge that whenever we discuss this, the goal is our advancement. The goal is eternal life. The goal is spiritual advancement. Everything centers around that because nobody, and I mean nobody, nobody is talking about a spiritual being without an aspect of it completely representing their own consciousness, right? So we have to understand how these things work. So that is the example of Zanoni. And in this case, it's a serpentine woman, right? But the idea of this kind of reptilian, serpentine guardian or kind of demonic entity that appears is really ancient. Even Blavatsky talked about this. And in even Anthroposophy talks about kind of like the lizard thing as well, briefly. But we really do see these very classical images that appear in the astral world in all traditions. They're just being called aliens now. They're just being called aliens, and they apparently fly around in spaceships, and it's weird. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So, not when you come at it from the place of like, we should be talking about this from the position of how does it advance humanity, not pure curiosity. And even like with different scientists, which is really bizarre to me, is they think they're going to make like an equation. They're going to make this equation that like explains the other dimensions. Yeah, no, you're not. Because the only way you talk about other dimensions is in regard to the qualities of the soul. When you start trying to talk about it in a material sense, you're just making spiritual things material, which means you're basically cut off. Like, you're never gonna, it's just not how it's done, right? It doesn't make any sense. You're just materializing spiritual concepts. So the first kind of image there is obviously this like reptilian image that appears as the dweller in Zanoni. And how much of what people will see, because listen, you have an astral body, right? And if something comes around you and you come under some kind of intense luciferic infection or luciferic influence or an harmonic influence, or even if there's saintly forces around you, that's going to affect the appearance of your astral body, and it's going to create an overlay over your body. So like a clairvoyant can look at someone and they'll simultaneously see your body, but then they'll also see your astral body overlaid on top of your physical body. And they'll be able to ascertain certain things about your soul and your life based on the fact that there's an overlay. And so it's not uncommon to get animal overlays or these different these archetypal qualities. And that is normal for a mystic to see that, actually. These anthropomorphic images, and particularly the serpentine one, because of Lucifer's lunar kind of portrayal. And so, like, again, we're just taking like a dweller image and saying it's an alien. We're taking a spiritual thing and we're saying it's an alien. And if people get angry at that and say, oh, well, aliens just are spiritual beings, well, why are you calling it that? Because the last thing a spiritual being actually is alien, unless it's a demon. Because spiritual beings are part of us. They're part of an interlaced spiritual hierarchies. Even the language alien isn't even come close to being a good word for angel. Angels are embedded in the human being. They're embedded in the earth. There's nothing foreign about an angel. The only thing that would be classified as inhuman and foreign would be a demon or a fallen angel, because they're denying God. But even then, they're not alien. So even this redefinition, for what reason? Like, why? It's not even a good redefinition of the thing. And it clearly arises from when people thought that it clearly also arises from the sci-fi age. People can spiritualize it if they want, but the idea of alien spiritual masters and stuff like that came around in the 50s, and they meant physical aliens. They did not mean spiritual beings. So the progenitor, the sort of like premise of it all was physical aliens. And then as people realized there were spiritual qualities to it, they just began to slowly say that the aliens are basically spiritual beings. But it's that materialistic quality that needs to be overcome. So the next person that really talks about the dweller or the guardian pretty well is actually Manly P. Hall. And he has a really good lithograph of it. I'll link it below in the description for you guys to read because I think that he really captured the essence of the dweller very well. And so the lithograph is called Children of the Elements, or Unseen Forces, Nature Spirits, Thought Forms, Ghosts, and Specters, and the Dweller at the Threshold. And so Manly's premise here, how he describes it, is that basically human beings are separated from the spiritual world because of sin. Now, sin is very similar to the Eastern idea of like negative karma, that in order for humanity to advance, we have to overcome, right? In order for us to truly become masterful and noble and glorified, we have to have things to overcome, things to transform. So in the West, that's called sin. We're born into sin, which means our soul carries things that we don't understand. It doesn't mean you're bad and that you should be ashamed of yourself and go like look in the mirror like I hate myself because I have sin. That's not the idea of sin. Sin is the fact that there's parts of us that are unhealed. We're separated from God. But the whole point of that is to learn and overcome it and transform it and then become more and more like him, right? So there's no evolution unless we're overcoming something, and that's karma or sin. And the dweller sort of forms, this spiritual being begins to enter into that space collectively in the world, kind of this collective guardian, right? As we'll get into Rudolf Steiner next. But also there's like this personal guardian. And they really represent humanity's sin. They represent what is keeping humanity from fully knowing God, what is keeping that individual from fully knowing God. So Manly P. Hall says that the dweller's threshold is the energy and life that we misuse every single day. So when we're not conscious, when we are doing things that are indulgent, when we're doing things from compulsion, impulsion, that actually feeds the dweller. That actually feeds the dark side, in which the dweller is a being that comes to represent for us. And the dweller also isn't like just some energy conglomerate like that forms or something. It's a being, it's an entity. But at that level of the hierarchies and the fallen angels and stuff like that, it is a being. But part of their existence sometimes is taking on these archetypal roles or participating to us in what we feel like is archetypal, but it is an entity. Okay. So he says, the guardian of the threshold is really the sin body of all creatures who have individual intelligence. So it's like the moment that you start to become your own person and individuate from the group, the family, the tribe, which is an important part of psychological and spiritual development, it's like in that process, you become more and more aware of your shadow, and the dweller becomes visible to you, right? So it's a very good, I'm not going to read any more from it because I think we're already going to go long today, but I will put that in the description. Now, Rudolf Steiner also talked about the guardian at the threshold, and he talked about it in a little bit of a different way in regard to initiation in his book. I think it's Knowledge of Higher Worlds. I think it's in chapter 9. But he says, yes, there is a guardian at the threshold, but there are actually two. The first guardian at the threshold is your personal guardian. It's like the microcosmic. And this is the guardian that we were discussing more so at the beginning, where you experience this guardian and it's personal to you, and it is really representing your sin body. is representing what you have not healed. It's directly personal and related to you. But then there's also the greater guardian at the threshold, which is like the macro dweller that the entire human civilization has to face, right? So there's the micro dweller, the micro sort of image of your shadow, which is personal to you. And then there's these like archetypal guardians that represent humanity's collective shadow, humanity's collective issues, because human beings are individuals, but we're also operating in kind of a shared soul as well, a shared experience. There's a shared level to our consciousness, and there's different themes and archetypes to every epoch that we live. So there is this collective level of initiation going on with the entire planet and with every single human being. And then there is the individual's own personal process in that, right? So that's kind of the multidimensional nature of the soul. There's this lesser and greater aspect. There's the personal, the microcosmic, and the macrocosmic. So, according to Rudolf Steiner, the lesser personal guardian angel, sorry, I'm so used to talking about guardian angels. It is definitely not a guardian angel. It is a guardian. It's a threshold guardian. The lesser guardian begins to appear when you become self-aware. This is very similar to manly. So the moment that you begin to think for yourself, develop critical thinking, understand feeling, begin to sort of attune your will properly, direct your will properly, and you begin to awaken to your higher self, that's when you begin to truly experience your shadow. Because at that point, you sort of have, you could say that you have something to strengthen you. You know, if you're not an individual, right? If you're not thinking critically, if you don't have your mind developed, if you're not striving to become closer to God, then you don't have the strength to really objectively confront your shadow. And you'll hide from it all the time, because you really do have to be united with God and attuned to your higher self to sustain these kinds of terrors. Okay. And then the greater guardian appears to the soul. I think he says that it appears to the soul when the soul gets to the next level. So what he's talking about is what you would call spirit self or manas, or when the astral body begins to become purified through right living and thinking and activity. That's when you experience your personal guardian. But there comes a point when you do that enough and you're perfecting yourself enough that eventually you begin to experience the collective as the self. And so there's a point where you actually begin to take on the sins of the collective. You become purified and clarified enough that you actually start taking on more than your own weight. And this is where you start to see the saints come into things. The great bodhisattvas, the masters, is that they've already purified their astral body, okay? They've dealt with a lot of these personal issues that are microcosmic in their soul. And now they're actually taking on the sins of the world. They're actually incarnating and they're taking on more than their own weight. They're taking on more than the average person, and they're confronting it and they're fighting this spiritual battle for humanity. And obviously we can see that to a degree with every single saint, every single martyr is doing that with their soul. And every single bodhisattva is doing that, right? It's the same word for the same thing. I also talk about that in my course, by the way. My Guardian Angel and Spirit Guides course coming up deals with the spiritual world. And that starts on the 6th of June. And I talk about the saintly realm, the saints, the communion of saints, the bodhisattvas, the spiritual masters. That idea I talk about in week 1. So if you want more on this than I can give today, I will be lecturing that on the 6th. Okay, so do check that out. So all of those beings that are these great individualities, they've already transcended a certain level of a relationship with their guardian at the threshold. Okay. Now they're actually dealing and taking on the collective sins. And the biggest example of this, most recent big example, is Jesus, who of course took on the sins of all humanity by bearing the Christ within him. So when you get to a certain level of human initiation, right? It's actually about taking on more than your own share. Okay, like being wonderful, being a great and powerful soul has nothing to do with like how many cars that you own or whether that person that you don't know likes you on social media or how much money you can make or how beautiful you can make your body with plastic surgery and transhumanism or whatever. That literally has nothing to do with the evolution of your soul. It's actually regressive. Okay. So when you get these real initiates that have actually confronted the dweller and one who have made themselves so noble they can pass through all those gates, the highest, most exalted thing that you can do is literally fight for humanity, is literally take on the burden that maybe other souls are not yet ready to take, and you carry that for the world. That is the most exalted thing a soul can do. Okay, it's not what you can gather up around you as stuff. Anyone can do that if they want to sell their soul to the highest bidder. Okay, that's not great. I'm not impressed by that. I'll be impressed when you can sacrifice these things for something greater. That's impressive. That's spirituality. And so that's what Rudolf Steiner's talking about when the greater guardian appears to the soul, which is these sort of larger archetypal collective guardians that really, in my opinion, represent humanity's troubles, right? And you get these great figures that will then take that on because many different souls are, humanity needs these great individualities to take the stress off and to create more time and to provide certain qualities to the collective through their activity, right? Because we all have a collective level of our consciousness. That's what helps us understand the crucifixion, actually, is this collective level of our existence and how these great spiritual initiates can affect that collective level through their activity and certain spiritual forces that enter into their body and affect the whole, right? But to do that, you have to confront these guardians. You have to confront the guardians at the gates, which represent first your own personal problems, and then the world's. And then when you get to the level of like a Jesus, or you get to the level of Christ, bearing the Christ, you're actually confronting even higher levels than that. You're liberating the entire world in one action. So these are things that we're at a point in development that we need to begin to understand. We need to understand initiation science. That's what we're really needing to understand. That's why all this transhumanism stuff is coming out. And, Elon Musk comes out and says these are Jesus-like abilities when they're actually it's like, he comes out and he's like talking literally about the mark of the beast. Like he's talking about chipping people. And then with incredible duping delight says this is Jesus-like. And I do think that they do. I do think that the tech bros do this because they're deeply troubled. And I think that it's just sort of like an attention thing. They like the intention. They like to spit in the face of people who are spiritual. They like to spit in the face of the people they want to control. And so at any point, you'll see these weird tech bros. Like Yuval Noah Harari did an entire lecture with like Jesus's face behind him, talking about how like probably like, I don't know, uploading yourself into the cloud or whatever dream. So a lot of these people, they neglect the internal process of alchemy, this internal process of creating eternal life within your subtle bodies and eventually your physical body. They deny that. They think it's all external. And guess what? They've created the system in which that it happens. It's like, okay, well, if you think that you've created, with the neural link or whatever, if you think that you've created a Jesus-like invention, what does that make you? It makes you greater than Jesus, right? If you're going to come out here and say, oh, I've solved these things, I've created the technology that's basically the same or better than Jesus healing, then what does that make you? Why say it? It's a tool, it's a technology. And by the way, um, people need to understand that like if you get a chip in your brain, even if it's gonna like reinvigorate your spinal cord, if you're gonna be operating in 5G and now 6G, you're a receiver. You're literally not going to think your own thoughts. Because it's not just having the chip in your brain, it's the fact that we're living in radiation. We're living in a world where there are smart towers everywhere. Okay, so it's not just about, oh, you have a chip. It's that the environment is designed to tap into that chip. So you're like an antenna. It's the environment and the fact that the entire environment around the earth is changing to a synthetic one, and then it's the chip. So even if you're doing something like, yeah, maybe you could have some kind of regenerative technology where it fixes the electrical issues in the brain or degenerative issues, but you can't have that with like cell towers everywhere, obviously, right? Because that's something else. Okay, you want to heal, that's fine. Okay. But then there's all this other stuff that goes with this baggage where it's like, you've got to get the chip from the guy who's saying he's like Jesus or better than Jesus. Like, can we just have technology without this weird religious stuff around it? Like I was saying at the top of the show, like can we just talk about it like it's a tool? Why is it that the data centers now, like, it's like now they're being like this is all weird spiritual stuff around that. Like, why is that there? What is going on with humanity where all the technology has to be compared to Jesus or spiritual things and the aliens are spiritual? We're coming into these topics that are inherently actually not really spiritual at all. It's just technology. It's a tool. It's there. But then there's this spiritualizing of it. And I think that again represents this threshold that we are coming across that represents humanity's potential crossing into it if we're not conscious, is kind of crossing into becoming transhuman, becoming cyborgs, genetically manipulating ourselves until we're an alien gray, basically. That's the dweller, guys. These beings that appear as demons or as aliens, they're dwellers. They're representing to us something about our own spirit. And yes, once you become infested with these kinds of entities in your aura, they will want you to create forms like chimeras and physical bodies that they can enter into, which look like them. So you can have a spiritual aspect that is like a clockwork elf, like an alien gray, that is genuinely appearing to people on ayahuasca or, in meditations, or if they listen to channeled people for too long, they'll start appearing, certain bad alien channelers and stuff. It's like an STD almost. They'll start appearing to you. And it's like, yeah, that's because that represents what we could potentially become. And they're going to lie to you and get you to do the exact thing they want. So you end up looking like them. You create forms like them eventually for them. That's how these entities take over the world. And that's why I was actually interested for a brief moment about the demonic thing about aliens, is that I think that there's an argument to be made for particularly the gray alien and the reptilian that literally connects to demonology long before anyone was talking about it. But then when you start getting into the Peter Thiels of the world, wanting to now say that like aliens are a threat, it's like they're listening to Christians in particular, and then they're figuring out how can we weaponize what Christians think about alien grays or reptilians or whatever and spin it to our advantage. So it's not just about, at this point, because we've got these overarching tech bros that are practically foaming at the mouth for control, it's not just about what aliens are, what technology is. We have to say, why is it that they're so interested in it? because it allows them to consolidate power spiritually, religiously, and technologically through the reverse engineered free energy stuff that they're going to associate with aliens to cover their own crimes, to cover the fact that none of this technology is alien, that, in my opinion, physical extraterrestrials don't exist. There's no evidence for that. And I'm not talking about like a piece of bacteria somewhere or something that is built up and then dies and nothing ever else happens. I'm talking about physical aliens existing in the cosmos, parallel or more advanced than man. I don't see any evidence for that. I'm open to it, but I have never seen any evidence for that. And whenever these people want to try to support aliens, they go back into the Bible with like Anna Paulina Luna and she's talking about aliens and then she's like, go read the book of Enoch. Okay, Luna, that's fallen angels. So why are we creating a dissonance here with language? Why are we associating fallen angels with technology? Why is that something they're completely obsessed with doing? Because the technology that we have that is advanced, it came from the Atlantean period again. It doesn't even come from aliens. And it doesn't even come from fallen angels either. The actual technology does not come from aliens or fallen angels. So I don't know what that's about. But how it came about in Atlantis is actually very specific, which we're not going to get into today. And we're not going to get into today. So Rudolf Steiner talks about this idea of the personal guardian at the threshold that represents your shadow to you. He also talks about the collective guardian at the threshold, which represents the collective issues and collective shadows, which oftentimes great initiates will take on. That's what makes them saints. That's what makes them Buddhas. So in order to become a Buddha, in order to become a saint, you have to take on something greater than yourself, right? You got to face that guardian. So let me read a couple Steiner quotes, and then we'll get a little bit into the East and theosophy and their coverage of this topic. And then we'll go a little bit deeper into aliens. I'm going to bring up Crowley, and then I'll leave you on your merry way. Okay, here's Rudolf Steiner's quotes. And by the way, he talks about this in The Knowledge of Higher Worlds, Knowledge of the Higher Worlds. And I think it's on chapter 9. And he says, the important experiences marking the student's ascent into the higher worlds includes his meeting with the guardian of the threshold. Strictly speaking, there are two guardians, a lesser and a greater. The student meets the lesser guardian when the threads connecting willing, feeling, and thinking within the finer astral and etheric bodies begin to loosen. So in anthroposophy, which is one of the greatest, I think, explanations of the different processes of initiation. So anthroposophy isn't trying to like give you the answers. It's not trying to give you like tell you what these things are, but they're giving you the different processes so that you can engage with them yourself, which is the ethical and moral way in which these things are taught. So any person who describes it that way, that's the best way in. And in anthroposophy, part of becoming a true initiate is being able to understand your thinking, your feeling, and your willing. And you have to and there's different exercises as well. I think there's 6 that allow you to kind of create that strong, solid column of being. Because where humanity sort of gets mixed up is that the thinking, the feeling, and the will get all kind of like mixed up and messed up. They're going in different directions. So if you can understand the feeling, thinking, and willing, then that creates kind of more coherence, and then you can begin to evolve. Okay, so that's what he means there. Okay, next quote. The guardian stands before man as what he would become if he entered the spiritual world unprepared. And actually, I was working on another lecture entirely, and I came across that Steiner quote. The guardian stands before man as what he would become if he entered the spiritual world unprepared. I came across that quote and I immediately thought of aliens. I immediately thought of the gray aliens and how the gray aliens like literally represent what humanity would become if they go into genetic manipulation and the Gattaca culture, if they go into transhumanism. And I realized with all this disclosure stuff, it's the perfect time to talk about the dweller at the threshold like this. I mean, even think about all these people who have these like ayahuasca experiences. Now, a lot of the plant medicine experiences are genuinely healing to people. I don't think that you can take that away from that experience. There's people who have actually gotten a leg up on addictions, had incredible visions and realizations, but there's also a part of plant medicine where there can be intrusions because you're just in the astral world, right? And it's often difficult to control when you're high. When you're in an altered state, it's very difficult to control it. You're kind of on a ride, which is an atavistic process. And so what ends up happening is that there can be these incursions by demonic entities at different times. And usually it gets really bad if people keep trying to go to plant medicine as their only spiritual path. So if you only want to experience spiritual life through a plant medicine or a drug, you will descend into madness, right? So you have to understand the ceremonial aspect of it, which can be very helpful, and then you have to know when to stop, because a lot of people have had the experiences do tend to degenerate over time, because even the spirit of the plant and the elemental and the angels that are associated with the plants, even when they give you that experience, they're not giving that to you to depend on it. The spirit of the plant isn't giving that to you so that you only take the plant to have a spiritual experience. They're giving it to you to break down the boundary between the mind and the spiritual world, because in a materialist era, it's so hard to even understand the spiritual world, to even be able to discuss it. And so, things like psilocybin and the different plant properties, they give that very raw experience. They validate, but they don't exist to become your only way in which you experience spirituality, the only way that you can relax. Nothing in material existence should be depended on. That is going to cause the degeneration of your soul. Okay. So, but what you do get, especially the people who insist on taking drugs all the time, is eventually these clockwork elves appear. Eventually these like gray aliens appear, and these different aliens appear, because eventually the spirit of that plant sees that you're using it. You're enmeshing with it, but you're abusing that plant. That plant does not exist to be a crutch. The whole point of the plant is to serve you. That's what it says in, is it Psalms, or I can't remember what part of the Bible, but that the plant world, the plant kingdom, is to serve humanity, and humanity is to serve and be a steward of the lower kingdoms. You're not being a steward of the plant world by using it to be your only spiritual experience. You're abusing that plant. You're using it. You're not developing, because the plants evolve through us as well, right? So when people do start to abuse plant medicines, or even when they're not, they can show up, but they're right there. These alien beings are right there, and start telling you, they tell people the same messages too, which is really weird. Sometimes it's like weird environmentalist stuff. Other times it's like transhuman. They get them. I think the weirdest one was like, I don't know who it was, Timothy Leary, or who it was, but whenever the alien grays would show up in these psychedelic visions, and they would just use psychedelics to be spiritual. Like these people had no interest in actually developing spiritually. They were like, we are going to just get high all the time. And that is spirituality. Spirituality is just being high, which is complete atavism. And so they would actually like start like giving them like advice. Is it Nick Lane? I can't remember who these. There's many different people from like the hippie era, from like the 70s onward and 60s onward, where like the Greys were like giving them like technology and giving them all this information to develop, like basically to become what they are, you know? And so that to me is completely fascinating. That is the exact, like we read Zanoni and the dweller in Zanoni, and for Zanoni and for Glydian, or the student in Zanoni, it was like a seductive reptilian woman. That was the dweller for him. Well, obviously, if you're going to be high out of your mind and like bursting into the astral plane with no control, and no precision, you're going to experience the dwellers. You're going to experience the dweller, the threshold. And they're going to tell you to do weird stuff because you're experiencing your own shadow and you're refusing to take responsibility for it and completely giving yourself to it, which is what's creating transhumanism and what's creating this obsession with genetics and eugenics, which is probably going to come forward in a big way, because most of the alien lore, a large portion of it is Sitchin and von Daniken and Van Tassel, and most of that stream eventually circles around rewriting creation and creating creation as eugenics, which means our future is also eugenics. Our future is Gattaca. Our future is transhumanism. You can't really sell transhumanism to a lot of people. You can't really sell the Gattaca culture of genetic manipulation and mRNA technology to a population naturally. A lot of people are going to be like, that is some mad scientist stuff, but there's a potential that you can do it if you tell them that they were created that way. Because if you were created through genetic manipulation by these aliens, which are more advanced and watching over us, then you can convince them that that's the future as well, and that humanity now must go off world and see different worlds, a la Elon Musk and Werner von Braun. So you're starting to see this entire cosmology, this entire spiritual perspective. It's also Avi Loeb. Avi Loeb wants to create this cosmic exodus where you go off world and you see it. Elon Musk wants the same thing. Werner von Braun wanted the same thing. Because if you have a secret society, or you have this, not even secret society, but if you're tapping into the dwellers, if you're tapping into the dystopian future, you have to tell people that that was our past. Because so many people are going to think that that's completely ridiculous. They're going to be like, no thanks. But then if they can convince you that you were created that way, that our beginning was that way, that every disease needs to be solved that way, that we actually won't thrive unless we go back to this genetic manipulation that started us. Now you're starting to see why this thing is happening. Now we can begin to get that picture. Now we can begin to understand, why did Zecharia Sitchin with Ancient Aliens have so much money spent on the History Channel and all these documentaries to convince people they were created in a petri dish? It's completely bizarre, but there's so much money that went into that. So much money has gone into Gaia and cosmic disclosure and the progenitors. They have been trying to push this thing for a very long time, and it's completely bizarre to Christians and to normal people, but this is what they believe. Whether you believe it or not, they believe it. And they need that in order to convince you that that's our future, right? So yes, it's bizarre. Yes, it's kind of dumb. But people believe this, and they understand that they can't really strategically, you know, consolidate power unless they change humanity's idea of creation, of their own creation. Because every single epoch, humanity evolves in the image of God until we can hopefully advance to become eternal like Him. But demonic entities need to stop that process from happening and trap you in the material world. The only way they can do that is by literally destroying your form. The physical form is the most perfected of the four bodies. We have four bodies: the physical, etheric, astral, and the I, the highest spirit, the higher self. And the whole thing is we have to integrate the subtle bodies into the physical body through initiation. When we do that, the demonic entities hate that because they have nothing to feed on. So the way that you prevent humanity from genuinely advancing is you destroy the physical form. You destroy it with genetic manipulation, and you destroy it with transhumanism. All of it is objectively demonic because it's preventing initiation from happening, because initiation in its last phase is the literal spiritualization of the body into a spiritual form. You cannot do that in a transhuman state without encountering incredible trouble with the form. You're adding all these roadblocks. Major sacrifices would need to be done at certain points to even begin to address that. So we need to understand how this relates to the initiation of the human being, because the attack on the form is the attack on the soul. It's the attack. It's an attack on you. And it sounds stupid and goofy, and I laugh at it too. I actually don't like talking about this stuff all the time because it just feels dirty, honestly. But people believe this. Even if you don't, very, very powerful people do. It makes no sense to colonize Mars if you have a holistic view of the world and the soul. The only world that planetary colonization makes sense in is a completely materialist, satanic one that doesn't understand at all how the earth and the human being evolves. We are on the precipice of the dweller, and these alien beings are images of the different dwellers. They are images of what our shadow is. And some people are completely captured. And Elon Musk was at he's at Donald Trump's, he basically, helped Trump get elected. And then it was he says it's to save Western civilization, but really he's buying favors. He wants certain things to be done. He shows up to the Oval Office and he's high as a kite. Most of the times that one technocrat shows up, he's higher than a kite. Okay, maybe you like him, maybe you don't, but that's completely, your consciousness is not your own. If you got to be high that much all the time, you're not present. What is? And you hear about these different tech bros, and it's all about getting high. It's all about getting high and playing video games and disassociating, yet they want to control the world. Well, do they have connections with these different beings? Because that's what appears. And you certainly seem to be carrying out the exact dystopian society that destroys humanity, objectively so. So this is what we're looking at. The guardians appear when you enter into the spiritual world unprepared. I'm going to read that Steiner quote one more time. The guardian stands before man as what he would become if he entered the spiritual world unprepared. So when you enter the spiritual world super high all the time, you never learn to meditate. You never learn to heal yourself. You don't have precision in the spiritual world. In order to have precision in spiritual life, you have to be self-aware. So if you have all these tech bros that want to be high all the time, Or all these people that believe in aliens and worship them, they're also really into like LSD and all this kind of stuff. It's like no wonder, because the guardian stands before man as what he would become if he entered the spiritual world unprepared. You enter the spiritual world unprepared through all these weird altered states, you're going to experience the dweller. You're going to experience a image of dystopia. Right. I'm going to close off actually by reading two more Steiner quotes. We'll just circle back briefly to his idea of the greater guardian and also the lesser guardian. So the greater guardian tells the pupil, this is the sort of archetypal collective guardian, tells the pupil that he must not remain at this stage, but must press forward with untiring energy. He calls upon him to realize that the world into which he has won his way can only become truth for him if he perseveres in his efforts. Otherwise, it will change for him into illusion. Were a pupil to submit himself to a wrong kind of training and come to this experience unprepared, he would, on approaching the greater guardian of the threshold, find himself completely overwhelmed with a feeling that can only be compared to boundless fear and terror. At the one stands the lesser guardian of the threshold, and at the other, the greater guardian of the threshold. The one portal leads into man's inner being, into the spirit of the microcosm. The other portal leads into the spirit of the macrocosm. All right. So that is Rudolf Steiner on the guardian of the threshold, and that technically we can view it as a personal entity, but also there's these macrocosmic entities that represent sort of archetypal problems within society. Now, the guardian is also spoken about in Eastern traditions, and usually in the West, the vast majority of Eastern teachings that we have in the West, it's changing now, but classically it's through theosophy. So when people have some kind of understanding of Eastern mysteries, it was generally through the Theosophical Society, with the exception of probably like Avalon, that one book there, who I don't think he agreed with the Theosophists, but there's a couple people that had lesser material, but most of it is through the Theosophists. What is his name? Avalon. I know he goes by the writer's pen name Avalon, but he has a different name, and that was from the 1800s. So when we go into how the East tends to view cosmos and spiritual life, I want to bring you guys back to the lecture I did a couple months ago called From Paganism to Plato to Christianity, because when you get into thousands and thousands of years into the past, especially the height of the great Indian civilization, which is like 7,000 BC, that's when that civilization was at its height. Any kind of real Eastern teaching views the human being slightly differently than the West. And that's why there can be on some level clashes, and the translations aren't exact, is because humanity's perspective is actually shifting over time, and the perspective of the human being is changing, and so they're describing the same things a little bit differently. But in the East, typically things are described in a more collective way. Spirituality is about releasing oneself back into the collective. The physical world tends to be Maya or illusion. In the West, that is not seen as productive anymore. And in Western esotericism, it tends more towards the advancement of the soul through individuation. So before Christ, there is this kind of collectivity to perspective, and the human being doesn't really perceive themselves as being separate from others or separate from nature at all. It's subjective, and then you get into objective as you move in towards the post incarnation of Christ. That's the simplest thing I can say from east to west. Also, check out my video, Spirituality Before Christ, and my atavism videos for more on that, the difference of perception. It matters. It really matters. So in the East, you get this. The East talks about the dwellers at the threshold, but it's more like beings. It's much more plural. Whereas when you get into the dweller at the threshold teachings in the West, you get into like Manly P. Hall, Edward Bulwer Lytton, Zanoni, Rudolf Steiner, Dion Fortune. You get into the Western initiates, and they talk about the individual aspect, the individual dweller at the threshold. That wasn't how the East saw it, because the East, that culture is not focused in that way. At that time, we didn't have the incarnation yet, so we weren't seeing things individually. And that the East retains the plural perspective. So the East has retained and preserved the pluralistic perspective. The West is developing the individualistic. They are not in competition. One is preserving something, the other is advancing something. Okay? So that's how that's viewed. And so how it's called, it's like in the East, the dweller wasn't necessarily seen as like attaching to an individual. That if that exists in the East, that's a very Western concept. But how it was classically seen was like not as this microcosmic individual experiencing his own shadow, but more as these different deities that existed that represented humanity's sin to them or represented humanity's light and shadow. So they kind of saw a cosmos of archetypal angels or devas that represented their qualities, light and dark, back to them. And then they would also talk about what is called a kama rupa, at least in the theosophical language, which are like these mechanical etheric shells that people would experience, that would represent these collective aspects of the human soul. So no individual experience with like their own personal doppelganger, guardian entity, but collective ones. So when they would experience the dweller, it would represent the evil in the world. So that's more of it was more of a macrocosmic experience. And the idea was that like a lot of the elementals would get together and sort of form these different strange looking entities and stuff that would represent, the shadows and the sin that was forming in humanity. And then also, anyway, well, it's a whole thing. I don't want to go too long today, but both are true. But the idea in the East was that they were seen as kind of like the Kamarupa, hope I'm saying that right, is they're automatic, like they're like a wraith or an eidolon, and they are like a shell. They're automatic. So really, you're not actually dealing with directly an entity necessarily, but a sort of shell. But of course, there's entities that are associated with that shell that can enter into it and that are forming it and creating it. But how spiritual beings operate is that they can project these shells, right? A lot of people's experiences can actually be these technically like projected shells of a demonic entity. So sometimes you're not experiencing the demonic entity or the angel, you're experiencing an etheric shell that forms as a result of their mind. I know that sounds crazy, but that's how a lot of different systems view it in the astral world. But that's not to say that they're not embodied. There is a being that is creating that and can enter into that. But for our intents and purposes, it's an automatic shell. And that's how the East would view it as well. At least in many texts, most of the ones that I found. So then when you move from like east to west, you start to get everything becomes more individuated. So the moment that you move from the Eastern traditions to the West, humanity begins more and more towards individuation and more towards confronting evil, and more towards seeing the dweller as like an individual battle. But in the past, it wasn't individual. Humanity operated as kind of like a tribe, and they were fighting with like collective forces. It was all collectivism at that point. So let's do a little bit of an overview of um, the alien phenomenon as kind of representing a collective shadow or a dystopian future. So the guardian at the threshold stands before man as what he would become if he entered the spiritual world unprepared. So the guardian in this way represents the fallen future of humanity, the kind of challenge that we must face. And I think the alien gray is literally representing that. I think the alien gray is a good example of the dweller at the threshold because, again, when you look at the lore around alien grays, they tell people like we are human beings or aliens degenerated because of the misuse of technology. Many people who have abduction experiences, they come up with these elaborate ontologies of alien grays as robots, as entities that are cyborgs, and entire federations of other entities that like are working with them in like the spiritual world that are also all using technology. When you get into the alien side of spirituality, all incredible feats are performed externally through technology mostly. There isn't the real teaching of initiation there because real initiation has nothing to do with technology. Spiritual initiation for the human being has nothing to do with a device. It has nothing to do with a healing technology that releases a frequency to relax you or a light beam that shines on you to repair your cells. That's different. Okay, that's not spiritual. We're having a difficult time in the culture separating what is a tool, what is a device and a tool for us, and what is spiritual, right? And in the alien movement in spirituality and conspiracy, the spiritual and the physical is completely fused, and technology is completely fused with the human being in these images. They fly around in these motherships. The whole thing is to genetically manipulate planets alive, to colonize other worlds. The Earth was colonized. It's a complete mad scientist view of if we follow these dwellers, what we will become. Another view of aliens that we see a lot is chimeras. So chimeras would often appear. In my video from paganism to Plato to Christianity, talking about this, how we view the spiritual world in earlier periods. Yeah, we know that these anthropomorphic beings would appear in spirit to humanity. Of course, now when we look at the cave paintings and we look at the drawings, people take it literally and they're like, oh yeah, that cricket thing, that's an alien. Even people who are supposed to be preserving their cultures are misinterpreting their own cultural symbols because the consciousness from when those symbols were created no longer exists actively in the human being, and we're in a different kind of consciousness now. So we see a lot of chimerical images. Like I've seen different Galactic Federation channelers that are saying that their spirit guide and their friend is like an entity with a cat head or a cricket face or, a dog head on a body. And so we're seeing chimeras as these spiritual beings in these different channeling circles. It's actually very popular in the New Age. It's like something that a lot of people have to go through as well. It's like you have to go through this literal materialistic interpretation of spirit until you can overcome it into real spirituality. That's kind of how I see it because the thrust of our development is to overcome materialism and literalism. And so when you start to open up, you see things materialistically, you see things literally. Of course you do. Of course we do. But we have to begin to see them in their real form, understand them in a real spiritual sense, which only comes through understanding the self, actually. So you get these chimeras, these half animal, half human things. They're like wearing spacesuits and they're always like these AI generated photos. And they're proving their existence by anthropomorphic images that people saw spiritually, but now they're aliens. And it just kind of represents like, I think that part of that also represents in the sense of the dweller is the animal nature of the human being. So the whole point of seeing the dweller at the threshold is he reflects to you your lower nature. So back in the day, if you were doing like a vision quest or a journey and you saw a spiritual image, you knew that that was reflecting something symbolic to you. You didn't think that was an entity in a spaceship with some technology to give you that's going to genetically manipulate you next Friday when you go to bed against your will. Right? So there is this aspect where when you encounter the dweller, you're getting an image of also your animal self. Your animal self is kama manas in the East. It's your lower impulses, your compulsion. That's considered the animal human. When you read ancient texts, okay, and they're talking about the animal human, they're not talking about a chimera. They're not talking about ape people. They're talking about the animalistic impulse within humanity. They're talking about a spiritual impulse that animals have. So animals are in a different class of soul than humans. Humans are a different class of soul than angels. And the thing that characterizes the animal soul is they're not individuated. They operate in a collective, and they operate purely on survival instinct and impulse. And so humanity has this sort of animal aspect in us that works through the lower centers. And we have to transmute that animal aspect or the kama manas, the animal soul or the animal spirit, meaning the unexamined self. The animal self is the unexamined self, the impulsive self, the compulsive self, the instinct, the survival element. That's the animal spirit of the human being. That's not referring to an animal person. It's not referring to like a time when human beings were apes and transforming the ape into a higher thing. That's talking about internal alchemy. When you transmute the animal aspect into an angelic aspect, it's not talking about literally angels genetically modifying animals or genetically modifying apes. That's literalism. It's talking about humanity literally reaching the level of an angel, a cosmic level of development, so to speak, through transmuting the animal self. It's not talking about genetic manipulation. That's literalism. That's materialism. Okay? But we see this interpretation, of course, and it's reflected back to us as these like chimerical entities that are like aliens. Like, I mean, with this disclosure thing, it's like, yes, there's lizard people, there's a cat person, it's like, this is us literally so flailing so in the wind, not understanding our own history, not understanding our own soul. We are right on the precipice of creating a really weird dystopia. Okay. And also this idea of like the gray alien happened during Atlantis as well, which is that during the Atlantean period, and Edgar Casey talks about this, and I think some other mystics do as well. And I believe it may have also been in some very ancient texts. But in the Atlantean period, they tried to basically make slaves by creating cyborgs and also did a lot of mad scientist experiments with creating human animal chimeras. And the reason why Atlantis sunk into the ocean is because it became a culture that just could not stop creating abominations and could not stop genetically manipulating themselves. And, um, transhumanism was going on already. And I know that that's hard for some people to believe. But again, when you look back and you see these anomalies that are these megalithic marvels, these incredible technologies and things like that, like, yeah, you have to understand that like that's not an alien, that's Atlantis. That's us in Atlantis. And there is a group of individuals that actually look like Greys and actually look super deformed that actually live in cavern systems in the earth. Now, Mac Tony's talked about these things as cryptoterrestrials. And I think Dark Journalist has talked about this on a show extensively as well. But yeah, we have a parallel group of humans that failed in Atlantis that literally look like degenerated humans because these things recapitulate. And people can laugh now, but suddenly when you have all these scientists trying to tell you that they have these tissue samples, I don't know if it's going to be the Weinsteins or who, and that they're aliens, then you have to have some idea of what's really going on. It's all crazy until it starts to happen, and then we don't have any real defense for it, right? Or real truth to bring forward. And I think that's a tactic as well, is make the topic so taboo, make it so crazy that nobody wants to talk about it, and you're a fool if you talk about it, right? And then eventually have your scientists, which think that they're the new priest class, right? They're going to recreate creation. They're going to bring in the technology. They're going to explain the spiritual planes with their scientific equations and stuff like that. Like, tell me, okay, so when you're passing away or you're having a spiritual experience, what are you going to do with your scientific equation? It's not a workable thing. Is it interesting? Yes. Is it perhaps useful in some capacities? Sure, but it's not spiritual. It's materialism. It's a material concept trying to bring the spiritual into it, which is not how you approach the spiritual at all. Objectively, not so. Has nothing to do with initiation and everything to do with control. Okay? So we had Atlantis. We did all of this genetic manipulation stuff. In Lemuria, there were certain things that happened. We forget about it, so on and so forth. Because we forget about it, because we have no reference points for it, we become susceptible to manipulation. Because we have no idea about our ancient past. Even some of the best theologians have a difficult time explaining creation from an esoteric level. That's your job. Okay, if you're a religious leader, you need to be able to explain esoterically creation, how the earth is created, how the human being is created by God. You need to explain that. That's your job. You are the representative of spirit to man. Okay? That's what spiritual teachers are. That's what priests are. That's what these different spiritual teachers of all these different religions are. You have to be able to explain that. Otherwise, we're going to get the petri dish story. Right? So, the highest level of the conversation, bar none, is going to be you have to be able to explain it esoterically from a spiritually scientific perspective. All of these things have to be explained precisely esoterically because science has the precision. It's delusional, right? Natural science is good for some things, but it's starting to branch into areas where it cannot go. That's the danger. It's not that we can't enjoy natural science, mathematics, physics, quantum physics, things like that. But they have a category, they have a potential. And now they're starting to expand into spirit, which is impossible. It's trying to go beyond its boundaries. Why? Because we've lost our spiritual perception. We don't have the visions of the angels every day anymore. We've lost that to gain our individuality. So we have to regain that, and we need real leadership that's able to have the exact level of technical explanation that a natural scientist would for dimensions or genetic creation. Okay? That you have to be able to confront it to the same level of technological elegance. The same level of sophistication spiritually must be brought to the natural scientists who now consider themselves priests, who are creating a new materialistic scientific paradigm for creation and for humanity and for the cosmos. That level of esoteric explanation must be more advanced than anything that natural science can come up with. Because it's not going to be good enough to just read myths and leave it at that. That's not what's going to work in 2026. Okay? Doesn't mean you can't cite them, but there has to be an elegant, sophisticated, spiritually scientific explanation of spirit, of creation, of man, of cosmos, of the metamorphosis of the human being over the epochs. That's necessary for this time, non-negotiable. Right? So a lot of the dwellers, a lot of the alien things that we see, like if our ancestors were looking at it, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's a dweller. That's a guardian at the threshold. That's representing something unhealed in humanity. That's not an angel." Okay, like an angel is not a gray alien. An angel from the spiritual hierarchies, an angel, an archangel, those are like superhumans, right? We're made in the image of God with the rest of the hierarchies in a descending order. So when you look at a gray alien, that's not an angel. What is that thing? And then it like starts talking to you and it's like, "Oh yes, we have genetically manipulated ourselves into this position. We have no genitals. We have this huge head. We have no," it's like, that's a dweller. That's a our ancestors would be like, "Oh yeah, that's an underground thing from Atlantis that did that actually failed during the Atlantean period and now is stuck underground." That's what they would say. The ant people or whatever. Or they would say, "Yeah, that's a dweller entity that is representing humanity's shadow to itself. So it does not go down that path," right? The other thing that you'll sometimes see that I also kind of think is an image of like the human shadow. Like, to quote Rudolf Steiner again, saying, "The guardian stands before man as what he would become if he entered the spiritual world unprepared." I kind of see these like collective spirits now. Like, I didn't think anything of it like maybe 10 years ago, but the more we progress forward, I also think that a very atavistic thing and a dweller thing is these like just conglomerates of consciousness. Like there's these like deep trance channelers that don't channel an entity, they channel like entities that are in like one conglomerate. It's like one substrate of like different consciousnesses ascended and like united together. And like now that we're coming into this transhuman age, I'm like, that's a little bit like uploading your consciousness in the machine, is it not? It's like if you were talking to like as in Andrea Puharich, the MK Ultra guy, and like Uri Geller. They're trying to communicate with the conglomerate consciousness of the nine and the rhombus UFO in the sky, which is apparently all of these souls that uploaded themselves into the machine billions of years ago on another planet. It's like, yeah, that to me seems like a guardian at the threshold experience where humanity's being told by all these technologists that we need to upload our consciousness into the machine. So now we're having that experience talk back to us from spirit, representing that potential to us. So it's not your future. It's not our future necessarily, but it's there for us to basically see and potentially even create if we go down the wrong path. So all of these like pure intelligent conglomerates that like are being beamed down from the comet or the satellite or the UFO, the machine, it's like, even with Avi Loeb, like, was that supposed to be like the AI signal that apparently is beaming down from these comets that he watches? Is that supposed to be like the aliens uploaded their consciousness into the machine and then it went off into the cosmos in a comet? These are people that seem deeply captured in some very dark spiritual stuff and are trying to bring it about on the earth. And to me, it looks like they are not making it through their encounter with the dweller and are actually bringing and trying to manifest that experience for everyone on earth, right? It's like they met the dweller and the dweller just completely took control of them. They're not passing the test. Instead of being like, no, you're trying to bring about planetary colonization. You're trying to bring about all of this gray alien stuff. You're not seeing what's really going on. All of those are images of what we will become if we go down the wrong spiritual path, right? Even like the idea of like the Nordics are like a mockery of early images of saints. Like when you first get the images of the Nordics, these like Nordic looking Pleiadians or whatever, the first ones, like Ashtar Command, that was supposed to be a spiritual master. So there's all these images of like bodhisattvas, of saints. Well, they just turned it into like a space saint. That's Ashtar Command. He was originally an ascended master. Originally, the movement tried to claim that this was a saint. And then over time, the beings got weirder and weirder and weirder until they were gray aliens and chimeras. The original space movement in the 50s, in the 60s, and even into the 70s when people were getting into like channeling aliens, of course, with the drugs and stuff like that. First, it was just like you would experience a saint or an angel. Then it turned into gray aliens. Then it turned into chimeras. Now it's turning into like an AI signal from a comet or from a satellite or from outer space. So it gets more and more inhuman the longer this stuff goes on, the longer that we have these alien themes, the more inhuman it becomes. So that's fascinating to look at as well. So the main themes seem to be the misuse of technology, genetic manipulation. The Greys don't even have genitals anymore, right? Um, the intellectualism is another theme where the gray aliens have this like huge head, and like little spindly arms and legs. It's apparently representing that they failed their initiation on their planet or whatever, and which is like, oh, the eighth sphere pretty much. And now they're trapped, and their body reveals that they never developed spiritually. They just went completely into intellectualism, completely into science, and everything else degenerated, right? And then, of course, the kind of chimerical looking animal, human aliens, represents potentially the regression of the human into the animal rather than the human transmuting and becoming more angelic. So they don't overcome their animal impulses. And then it's ahrimanic. It's satanic and ahrimanic to outsource your development into a technology, which is what most of these alien channelers eventually say. There's no need to really even talk about technology in regards to spirituality. It's not even a big connection. But then when you hear these alien channelers and all these people that come forward in the conspiracy movement, like spirituality and technology is like this. It's like one thing, which is not normal. It's not natural. That's a disease of the mind, of the spirit, to do that. And also the Luciferic impulse in particular. So the Ahrimanic entities, the Ahrimanic fallen angels have an effect on the consciousness, which is to push the human soul towards materiality, materializing technology, natural science, and separates the human being from the soul. So it weighs it down so much that it separates from spiritual life, creating fractures, making initiation almost impossible if you get too far into it. And then the Luciferic impulse and the Luciferic fallen angels have a different effect than the other kind of fallen angel. This is in the anthroposophical system, where the Luciferic angels actually do the opposite, where the Luciferic angels separate the human being from physicality. So the Luciferic angels are always trying to like speed the human being up so that the spirit is pulled up out of the body and off planet. So the Luciferic impulse is actually this kind of premature causality, it's sort of like this trying to pull the soul up into outer space, up into the cosmic planes before it can naturally develop the properties to do so through Christ or to do so through normal spiritual development. So the Luciferic impulse is trying to pull the human soul out of the body and off world all the time. And Ahriman is trying to pull the individual, fragment them deeper and deeper into matter. And it is the Christ that balances these two impulses, making them productive in the human being. So I do find it interesting that so much of the alien stuff, especially on the spiritual side, is extremely Luciferian in that it's all about like pulling the consciousness up out of the body into fantasy, into delusion, and even thinking that they have to get off planet or leave the earth because the human being is part of the earth. The human being's energy body is united with the earth and the sun. You can't just like leave the earth, right? So that is a Luciferian concept that appears to people when they're totally possessed by Luciferian angels, by Luciferian fallen angels, and they have no conception of Christ. They become Luciferic in their nature. The same thing with Ahrimanic angels. If you get completely overshadowed by an Ahrimanic angel, an Ahrimanic entity, you're going to be pulled deeper and deeper into thinking that calculating and intellectualism and thinking that science is all that there is, the material world is all there is, to the point that it's not even like a thought. It's like you just literally cannot feel it or think it after a while. It's a complete shift in your perception. The same thing with the Luciferic angels. It becomes your perception. It becomes your mind. And it produces certain thoughts. It produces certain ideologies, always using shared archetypes, always using shared experiences, but it's a kind of perspective that leads the person to destruction. And alienism is very Luciferic in that it's literally drawing the human being out into space, which is destructive. And then also it's bringing in this technology element, which is completely Ahrimanic, that you need to have the UFO. And a lot of whistleblowers say that the ultimate thing is that it's not that you develop your resurrection body, which allows you to do incredible things in spirit. It's like, no, the biggest thing is that you literally merge your consciousness with a spaceship. And that's the biggest thing that man now has to do. You literally merge with the machine. That's the biggest thing. That is the perfect alienism, and transhumanism is the Luciferic Ahrimanic deception to a T. To a T. Lucifer pulling the consciousness of the human being out of the body into space, into the spiritual world, into heaven before it's even ready. Right? spiritualizing delusions, Ahriman, the technology, scientific priests. That's what the alien conspiracy, all this alien conspiracy disclosure stuff is. It's literally those impulses. And that's why they seek to attack Christ and say, oh, yes, you need to, we have the ability to be Jesus-like. We have the key to eternal life. It's why they directly and particularly attack Christianity, is because that through the Christian impulse, we really get those keys to resurrection. They don't exist in the human consciousness in the earlier systems the way they do after Christ. So if they want to be the individuals that bring you immortality, okay, they can't have Christianity exist. Because especially esoteric Christianity, it's all about resurrection. It's all about eternal life. If you're understanding Jesus properly, in my opinion, a huge aspect of it is resurrection, is the deed he did for us so we could be like him. And what we're seeing with these disclosure narratives, especially aliens and technology, completely attack your real immortality, your real understanding of it and practice of it. So, the horrible form assumed by the guardian is only the effect of humanity's own life, our own character risen out of us into independent existence. We can see that the modern alien experience echoes the themes of the dweller at the threshold. Many people claim they have spiritual visions and experiences with what they call alien beings. The government admits that these entities are interdimensional. So should we not apply our knowledge of how we cross that threshold of interdimensionality into the spiritual world, which includes humanity confronting the guardian? Many of the themes that appear in the alien lore represent man's struggle with his shadow, his urge to play God through technology, his failure to overcome his animal nature, and most of the cold intellectualism that drives the creation of a new spiritual paradigm in the image of both Luciferic abandonment and the Luciferic abandonment of the earth and the materialistic delusions of Ahriman. Okay. I don't want to go too long today, so we're just going to cover Crowley's Lamb because I don't think that we could discuss the Dweller at the Threshold and the Greys without bringing up very briefly Aleister Crowley's Lamb. So Aleister Crowley is a controversial ceremonial magician who created various different kind of occult groups and secret societies. And what's fascinating, I'm not going to get too much into Crowley because I think a lot of you know about him and there's so much information out there. But what's interesting about Crowley is that in 1919, he writes this book that is, I believe, a response to Blavatsky's essay, The Voice of Silence, right? And there were all these kind of weird occult like battles going on, these kind of there's different streams in spirituality, there's different impulses, and different teachers are embodiments of different impulses basically. And so you do get these little battles going on sometimes between the different schools. And so in 1919, Aleister Crowley publishes this book, and it's one of his Liber books. I think it's Liber 21 or XXI. And he publishes this image in it. Lamb. He doesn't say anything about this big-headed entity in the book, this response to Blavatsky. He just sort of publishes Lamb on the opening page. Now, when this happens, sometimes in writing, it's a dedication. So usually what you put on the first few pages of a book is a dedication of the material to that entity, or you're showing the reader where that information is coming from. So the first portions of a book is for dedications, and it's showing you the stream in which you are working from. That's what the front of the book is often for. Okay. Now, I'm not sure if you guys have watched Dark Journalist's series, but he has also pointed out that one of the code words in the sort of shadowy corridors of government and aerospace and the UFO technology is blue. So, one of the words that these different secret societies use to describe particularly this development of this technology, which they view this technology as being spiritual. Okay, so the dark occult is an externalist orientation. And the biggest thing that they can do is to create technology, because the only way that you're ever going to do something in black magic or the dark occult truly is if you cannot turn your focus internally and heal yourself and go on a natural path of spiritual development through inward honesty and humbleness and development. It's a totally different path. So everything then has to be externalized. If you're not going to go inward, you're not going to know thyself, you're not going to turn towards Christ, which is within, you're going to start to build and have to have these different things ceremonially outside of you. All spirit is going to have to eventually be outside of you. All the spiritual experiences are going to have to be through machines or through external things, right? Almost like a pagan system, completely externalized, completely technologized. Because in the pagan period, everything was external to us. There was no internality like there is today. So they're sort of trying to upgrade what would be a very pagan natural perspective and bring it to its pinnacle with technology. That's how you could see it. So a lot of the darker occult groups, they really see technology as a way to, like a golem, embody these different entities that they're communicating with. They see technology as a way to communicate with beings. And they see technology as a way to control others, because they also believe in a domination paradigm. When somebody goes into black magic, truly, it's usually to serve the self, which means there's a domination element to that person's personality. So that's why you see that interface between technology and the underdeveloped soul, is because they haven't turned inward, right? And so I found it very interesting that, there's this blue program, which is, recovering crafts, and there's these different, these different people that Dark Journalist calls ex-protect, that use the code word blue in their work, in what they're doing. And then I find it very interesting that Aleister Crowley comes out, plops a picture down of a gray alien, calls it Lam or Llama, and then it's also in the volume, it's also in his Blue Equinox series. So there's also the blue aspect of Freemasonry. So I think that the blue thing is significant here. I think that Lamb appearing in Blue Equinox, and I think all that is a little bit of a hint, So Lamb is really the first gray alien that we see. It means llama. And he said that Lamb is the Tibetan word for way or path. And Lama is he who goeth, the specific title of the gods of Egypt. So Crowley said in this book, Lamb is the Tibetan word for way or path. Okay, so, all right. So through Lamb, we are getting the way, we are getting the path, right? Through the gray aliens, we are getting the way, we are getting the path of dystopia, of self-destruction. Lama is he who goeth, the specific title of the gods of Egypt. And then you'll see this as well with the technology side and aliens later, is one of the biggest New Age sensations that came about And it's bizarre to me that it's still popular now because, you know, anyway, it's called the Law of One, or like the Ra teachings, which originally actually don't come from Carla Rueckert at all. The Law of One is rooting itself in already existing material, which is Edgar Cayce. So Edgar Cayce is the mystic who comes up with the idea of the Law of One and Ra Ta, and does all of these teachings around Atlantis. So Edgar Cayce is probably the most prolific mystic on Atlantis to date. He has thousands of readings where he describes humanity in the Atlantean period. And he talks about himself actually as the priest Rata. And you can see these Egyptian undercurrents in Atlantis because the Egyptian plateau was actually significantly older than like Zaki Hawass or these different Egyptologists say that it is. They're hiding the real age of it. And so there is this deep connection between Atlantis and Egypt. Egypt is a legacy civilization of Atlantis. And so what's fascinating is all of a sudden, like long after Casey's dead, now other people are channeling Ra. Now other people are channeling the Law of One, and they're kind of like attaching themselves to Casey and Casey's Atlantis work and everything that he's done, but then they're changing it. So they're kind of doing stolen valor, really. There's no question about that. In my mind and in my opinion, that came through Edgar Cayce, and the nature and quality of what's being said in the Law of One books, the Law of One channel books, is a completely different essence than what Cayce was doing, who was a Christian, an esoteric Christian, right? Cayce was a Sunday school teacher who talked about Jesus, who talked about the Emilius group as precursors to Christ. And then you have this weird like Law of One book appear that's all about aliens and this channeled stuff that's using Casey's work, but like it's a totally different thing. It's like hijacking, in my opinion. I know some people love it, but what really made me question this Law of One stuff was that they also claim, kind of like Crowley, that these are the gods of Egypt. So Ra in the Law of One, that is a trans-channeled book, is supposed to be the god of Egypt, right? So here Crowley's also saying, well, what I'm communicating with is Lamb, this thing, which is an alien who's also apparently connected to the gods of Egypt. Now, where it gets really weird is that in the Law of One series, some people started to make the connection between the alleged MK Ultra doctor, Andrea Puharich, and his channeling of the Nine, right? Now, Andrea Puharich is a very problematic character, used a lot of MK Ultra techniques. A lot of the psychics that he kind of forced to work for him ended up going insane, and he almost kind of went down that path as well. But people were wondering, people asked the Law of One channeler if the aliens that Puharich was channeling, who were the nine gods of Egypt that Puharich was channeling, said he was channeling, and the Law of One Egyptian gods were the same. And Carla Rueckert says, yes, the same entities that I'm channeling here to make the Ra teachings or the Law of One are the same entities that Andrea Puharich is channeling from Egypt. So Andrea Puharich's the nine aliens from Egypt is the same beings as the Law of One is using. The Law of One material, the Ra channelings from Carla Rueckert, popularized by Gaia and David Wilcock and all of that whole thing is the same stream, admittedly, as the MK Ultra doctor and CIA guy, Andrea Puharich. So one of the most popular books in the New Age is channeling Egyptian alien gods associated with the word Ra. Ra is the solar angel. Okay, Ra is like saying Michael. Okay, When you look at Ra in the Egyptian tradition, it is not talking to you about an alien in a spaceship. It's not a conglomerate of spiritual essences talking to you from a keyboard or a megaboard or whatever it's called. It's talking about the solar angel. It's talking about the solar angels. It's like Apollo. It's a sun angel. It has literally nothing to do with technology, nothing to do with aliens, nothing to do with Andrea Puharich, nothing to do with these raw channelings. So there is this weird hijacking of Edgar Cayce's work, which is esoteric Christian material that's funneled into aliens and technology and Ra and the Law of One teachings, which are basically the same entities. They admit that they are, as Andrea Puharich, who was working for the CIA, allegedly, and MK Ultra, allegedly. It's literally a mind control guy. So the New Age and all of this kind of also relates back to this. The first alien of Egypt, which is Crowley's Lam, the way or the path, he who goeth, the specific title of the gods of Egypt. So they're using this Egyptian thing. It appears in Ancient Aliens. And what the dark side does is exactly that. They find someone's material, right? And then they distort it, right? They can't create anything themselves. They have to go find Edgar Cayce's material and distort it. They have to go distort the Bible and make it weird so no one wants to read it anymore. They have to go and read the ancient Egyptian texts and misinterpret them so no one gets that anymore. So the dark side, what it does is it takes real, genuine things, real, genuine people's work and creations that are beautiful, and then it twists it and turns it into something it's not. But they're depending on you to have an imprecise knowledge and an imprecise sense of things so that you just get these little kernels of truth and you run with it. Because every lie has these little kernels of truth that only maturity can reveal to you. And I know because I've been there. I've believed some things that I can't even believe I believed. I'm sure you guys have too. But there's no question in my mind that there's something very weird with this hijacking of Ra, which is the hijacking of Michael, the hijacking of the idea of the solar angel, right? It's bizarre. And a lot of people will say, well, oh, well, Lamb, Lamb isn't really an alien. He's just like a spiritual being. But the individual who actually inherited Crowley's work after Crowley passed, his name was Kenneth Grant. And he actually claimed that it was an alien and an interdimensional. So Kenneth Grant, who was kind of like his understudy or the person who inherited all Crowley's material, he said that, yeah, no, that's an alien. That's what Crowley meant. It was an alien before aliens. And of course, like Crowley was in contact with L. Ron Hubbard, who creates a space religion. Crowley was in contact with JPL, the JPL guy, Jack Parsons. So Jack Parsons was creating NASA, which is the literal space component of ceremonial magic. And then L. Ron Hubbard is creating a religion around it. And Crowley himself is talking to this in Blue Equinox. And they're the Egyptian gods or whatever. So it's all of this weird, distorted stuff that I think the modern disclosure movement is it's actually good that this is all happening because it is bringing it to the surface. And the spiritual topic, the metaphysical, is the most hard to do. It's the most difficult to talk about. You can't really convince people of anything spiritually. I mean, someone can watch this and I can tell you that the 9 is associated with a literal CIA operation in mind control. A Course in Miracles has that connection as well. and these different movements have deep connections to three-letter agencies. They may have some truth to them, but you cannot deny that they have these associations with mind control programs and stuff like that. And people won't believe you. You can give people the details and the facts around something, but people will not factor those in until they're ready. And that's the interesting thing about all of this. And what's going to happen with disclosure, if any of these topics we're talking about today are brought up, is like, yeah, people are just going to go with whatever's inside of them ultimately. They're going to experience the dweller and they're going to go with whatever they can handle. So that's the kind of fascinating thing is with spirituality, like you can't convince people to believe something. Belief is something much deeper than a logical argument, right? Belief is your direct connection with the Holy Spirit and what has been revealed to you through the Holy Spirit. So that's what it is. That's what belief comes from. It's not an intellectual pursuit. It's a spiritual pursuit. So that's why these things carry on. It's why people believe ridiculous things or why people believe crazy things. To some people, it's crazy. To others, it's not, is because belief is something that has to do with that individual's connection to God, right? It doesn't make sense. So I'm pretty much going to leave you guys here. I think we've done enough for today. I'll definitely cover this stuff more on Occulted. But I just want to remind people as well that the idea of like this galactic federation. So in 2020, Haim Eshad, which is the Israeli space minister, he was a space minister for decades. He comes forward and he says that Donald Trump knows about the Galactic Federation and the secret space program is working with these aliens, and that Donald Trump just doesn't want to reveal it. This is the Israeli space minister that's saying that. And I just want to remind everyone that the first time we hear the words, the Galactic Federation of Light, is through Scientology. It first appears in Scientology in OT8. And this is where L. Ron Hubbard reveals to his adherents that there is a galactic federation of Lucifer. Eventually, people didn't like that the Galactic Federation was literally Lucifer, remember, drawing the human being out of the body into space. And so it became the Galactic Federation of Light because Lucifer is the light bearer. Lucifer means light. So we get the GFL, the Galactic Federation, that is right out of Scientology. So that is right from Crowley also. It's this. I also think it's interesting. Here's the communion image from Whitley Strieber. So there's communion. They're very similar. I also think that like the idea of wearing the masks. So a lot of people who are abducted say that it's like a person wearing a mask. And then they'll call that like military abductions or whatever. But yeah, there is a theme actually of people actually wearing like masks of grays as well. And I do find that there is some similarity between also Ahriman. It's not exact. I definitely would not say that Ahriman is a gray necessarily. But these are deformed. These are deformed things. They're not human anymore. When you look at an angel, when you see an angel, it looks like a person. It looks like a glowing, exalted human being because they represent the future of humanity. They're not the humanity in the future. They represent what humanity could become. Right? So I will leave you guys there. I will remind you one more time that I am going to be teaching starting on June 6th, my Your Guardian Angel and Spirit Guides class. And I'm going to go into spiritual beings in that. It's titled Guardian Angel and Spirit Guides, but it's really it's a very in-depth class series on angels and spiritual beings in particular. And if you really want to get to know the spiritual world, that's going to be a really great experience. So here it is here. And we're going to go for 6 weeks. So we're going to go every Saturday at 3 for 6 weeks. There's going to be 5 lectures and 1 Q&A at the last week. The last week, week number 6, I'm going to do we're going to hang out for an entire afternoon, and I'll just take any questions you have on the class about spirit guides, angels. And I've really devised this class because I think that, talking even about the dweller today, I think that we kind of have 2 ways to look at the cosmos in the future. One way is a completely inhuman cosmos of like waves and particles and dimensions that are just like the 3rd dimension that you just blip into and out of. And then there's this view of the cosmos with initiation in mind, with your initiation in mind, which is that when you view the cosmos through the perspective of your own advancement and initiation, you see the cosmos as beings. So we actually exist within beings. We actually exist within our guardian angel, and the earth exists within the realm of the angel. So surrounding the earth is not like another plane. That's not really how you view it, because that's meaningless to you. Surrounding the earth is the world of the angels. Surrounding the angels is the world of the archangels. And each one of those represents a different level of initiation for humanity. So the way that we view the cosmos is actually through beingness, through humanness, through life. We live within beings, and beneath us, on a spiritual level, our lesser beings is the animal spirit, is plant spirits, are the spirits of the minerals. And so there's a productive way to view the cosmos, which is through the spiritual hierarchies as being surrounded by beings, and within beings, within great beings, with the cosmos itself being one great being we live within. Or there's this bizarre materialistic scientific view of human beings that basically is creating this world of atoms and particles and waves, and you can just you're just kind of living in a 3D version of the spiritual world. You're living in a hologram, you're living in a simulation, which can describe part of the experience of spiritual life sometimes, but it's not an ontological description. So you can't create an ontology with initiation in mind by saying that we live in a simulation. That's not an ontology. That's an experience that people have. Right? So we have to have the right ontology. We have to have the right structure in order to become initiates, which is that we actually are interconnected right now with angels. Actually, part of our energy body is united with angels. And that's what I talk about in here. And that's why I focused on beings, which is angels and spirit guides and saints and bodhisattvas in the spiritual world. That's what I talk about in that course. You can take it if you are a beginner. We will start out very, very simple and work into complexity. If you can't take it, if you don't want to, I have a playlist on my channel that's called Guardian Angels, Spirit Guides, and Psychic Perception. And it has a lot of information there. And my channel has a lot of very basic information that if you just watch it and you do your own research, you can gain a lot from as well. So you guys, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been my absolute pleasure. Leave your questions, your comments in the comments below. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That really helps me here. And sign up for my announcements letter where I let you know when I'm going to be speaking or anything that I'm doing. Okay? Thank you so much.